Hi, this is Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation Podcast. This podcast isn't some magic trick about how to work less. Instead, it's about how to really enjoy the work that you do and to enjoy your vacation time. Hi, Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation. Who is considered the second greatest British personality of all time? When the BBC did a poll in 2002, they expected somehow that Winston Churchill would be in that top 10 list. But there, in second position, was someone whose name was reasonably unfamiliar. A name that didn't belong in this century, nor from the previous century. A man who was born in 1806 somehow, mysteriously, found his way to the second spot. His name? Isambard Kingdom Brunel. He was one of the most famous engineering minds of all time. And Brunel, he built a magnificent ship, and it was called the Great Western. At the time of its construction, the Great Western was the longest ship in the world. There she sat at 236 feet with one stunning goal in mind: to cross the Atlantic. The trip was to start from Bristol in the UK and then terminate in New York City in the United States. The goal was audacious because no one believed in the commercial viability of such a long journey. In 1838, despite many technological developments, shipbuilders presumed that a ship had limited capability. They believed that no ship could carry both commercial cargo as well as enough fuel to make this very long journey across the ocean. Brunel was a person who thought differently about long journeys. For one, his heart was set on engineering. He developed a theory, a sort of formula that involved the amount a ship could carry and how that ship could be built so that it faced a lot less resistance from the ocean. Armed with this formula, he set about building the Great Western. Instead of a ship just made from wood, Brunel added bolts. He added diagonal iron reinforcements. He increased the strength of the keel, and then he carried 4 masts for the sails. And so, the ship, the Great Western, embarked on her maiden voyage from Bristol with 610 kilos of coal, cargo, and 7 passengers. Despite all the plans and engineering, Brunel's ship hadn't got off to a great start. In the 1830s, there was a competition to be the first to cross the Atlantic, powered by steam alone. The Great Western should have been well on its way, but it ran into difficulties before leaving Bristol. There was a fire on the ship. It was a minor fire, but Brunel was hurt in the fire, so he wasn't able to make the journey. As a result of the fire, 50 paying passengers cancelled their trip. Finally, the ship made it out of Bristol's harbour with just 7 people on board. What's worse is that it was 4 whole days behind its competitor, another steamship called the Sirius. The Sirius left as scheduled, leaving the fire-stricken Great Western still in dock. Now, the Great Western and her crew were well and truly behind, and Sirius would get all the glory. But Sirius's trip was anything but glorious. Along the way to New York, Sirius ran into serious trouble. They started to run out of fuel. Her crew was forced to burn cabin furniture, spare yards, even an entire mast because of this fuel problem. And they took 19 days to get across the Atlantic. The Great Western, in comparison, arrived like the queen of the seas. She took just 15 days and 5 hours, and she had a third. That's almost 200,000 tons of coal to spare. This is a story about journeys, a writing journey in particular. I didn't want to write. My story is one about being nudged and pushed into writing. When we started out our first website, that is our first marketing website, I was writing for a fledgling portal called marketingprofs.com. Back in 2000, everyone was a fledgling and there wasn't much content online, as there is in this moment in time at least, which is why the founder of Marketing Profs, Alan Weiss, he would email me and he'd ask me for an article. This meant that I had to write. I didn't want to write, but I didn't have much of an option. We were new in the business, we'd just moved to New Zealand, and the only way that I could get any credibility in the marketplace was to get my name out there. And I ran into difficulty almost instantly. Every article was a real trouble, something I detested, yet I persisted. Over the years, I've learned that sheer determination and persistence is not enough. That engineering and planning, that makes the biggest difference to the journey. And we're going to cover the journey today, what I've learned in article writing over the years. And we're going to cover 3 elements as always. The first one being why a coach and editor are incredibly crucial. Not just any coach, but how to find that coach and editor. The second is why writing for yourself is a tedious process and you need to avoid it. And the third is why the one-word concept is your compass in the darkness. So let's start off with the first one, which is why a coach and editor are incredibly crucial. Whenever the topic of child genius is brought up, one name rises above them all: Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. This kid, we are told, was a prodigy. Before the age of 6, he was already composing music. Most kids barely find their way around school at this age, and yet we are told Mozart was already competent at playing the piano. He could play the violin. He was also rumored to have transcribed entire scores of music after a single hearing. How much of this is true? How much of it is stagecraft? We don't know. But one thing we know for certain, Mozart had a coach. You don't think of a coach when you hear the name of Mozart, do you? Yet, Mozart's coach was his dad, Johann Georg Leopold Mozart. And Leopold Mozart wasn't your average let's play music kind of dad. He was already a famous author on violin playing. He was already celebrated enough to be the deputy director of music to the Archbishop of Salzburg. Plus, there was Nannerl. That is Mozart's sister. When Nannerl was just 7, her father decided to give her piano classes because he believed that she was gifted. So there was Mozart, baby Mozart, surrounded by all these incredible musicians, but primarily coaches. Without coaching, you can go far, but it takes a lot of time. So when you read studies that quote the concept of 10,000 hours to mastery, what fails to emerge is this factor of mistakes. As a beginner, you're expected to make mistakes. You aren't aware when or where you're making the mistakes. All you feel is this frustration, this resistance that ships often felt back in the day of Isambard Brunel, that something is wrong with the engineering, but you're not sure what to fix. And if you can't figure out where the mistake lies, then you run into all kinds of trouble along the way and limp into what seems to be like an article harbor. So coaching is valuable, that we already know. What's hard is knowing how to find a great coach. For me, this process of finding a coach has been streamlined to a single factor: skill versus information. I call it preacher versus teacher. Is the coach going to give you more information, or is he or she going to give you a skill? Alex Bloomberg, ex-Planet Money, is also the co-founder of Gimlet Media, and he's a coach. How do I know that? Because in the world of telling radio stories, Alex doesn't pound you with needless information. Instead, he has a method, even a formula of sorts. For example, when telling a story, he shows you how to evaluate a story. Let's say you're writing a story about homeless people. How would you use his formula? Well, first you have to know the formula. The formula runs like this: the story is about X, and it's interesting because of Y. When we take the X, the story is about homeless people, that's the X, and it's interesting because of Y. What is Y? That 20% of them are college graduates. Notice how it instantly gets your attention? The why. Why is it interesting? That's what gets your attention. If we took that same line and ran it, maybe put something else in there, and you say, the story is about X, which is homeless people, and it's interesting because why? Many of them have these mental problems. Now, immediately you notice it's not that interesting. So the first one was more interesting than the second. And that's what Alex has. He has this formula. So he's giving you the ability to create a skill for yourself, to evaluate your stories, evaluate your paragraphs, evaluate whatever you're putting down there on paper, on radio, or anywhere else. So in his courses, he goes about things systematically. He talks about editing, he talks about music. And then what you end up is not a lot of information, but specific skills. When you look at the Mozarts, you look at the Phelps, the Brunels of the world, they all had coaches. Coaches that enable them to find their mistakes and then move forward. And in article writing, going it your own way is the slowest boat to anywhere. I know, because I took that boat. I took that boat in the field of cartooning, in the field of article writing, in so many fields. And it took me ages to figure out the connectors, the first 50 words, the endings, the beginnings, the structure. All of that article writing misery could have been reduced if I had a coach. A coach that had a system who would then point out the errors and get me quickly down the road. To me, of all the skills that you have to learn as an entrepreneur, article writing stands out because you have to have a precise structure when writing. You have to be interesting. You have to tell stories. You have to stand out in a sea of content. Which is why even today I will go to workshops, I will buy a course, I will read books, because that's how you get better at what you do. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that without a coach, you're floundering, even when you think you're pretty good. To get outstanding at what you do, you have to find a Johann George Leopold Mozart to help you along. But it's not enough to just have a coach. You also have to have an editor. And I have 5 or 6 editors at the very least, sometimes more. There's David and Pamela and Teresa and Renuka. and Alia and Philip and Zach. And every one of these editors come from a different angle. They have a different perspective. They force me to relook at what I've written so that I fit their needs. I remember the time I was writing a book and I had written more than 3/4 of the book when I showed it to Philip. But Philip wasn't impressed. All your books, they show me how to do things, he said. This one is all information, nice information, but not a lot that I can implement. So I've learned that there is no use fighting these editors. But we're talking about articles, not books. So would I do this for every article? Going back in time, yes, it's what I did for every article. One of our earliest clients, Chris Ellington, he would look through all of my work. He would shred it more than I liked. And it made me a better writer. But even now, I'll post the series in 5000bc.com, and there are questions, lots of questions. The questions are a form of edit. They show me what's missing from the series, from the articles. They show me what repairs I have to do. Plus, what we also do is we put in what bugs me on the website. So when you go on the website, you can see the what bugs me. It's alongside every article. So years after an article is written, you can have a retrospective feedback. And this is my first learning in article writing, that at all times you need a coach who can find structural mistakes, who can help you get better at the core skill of writing. And then, once you've written, you need someone who can pick out the holes, who can get the article to the level that it deserves to be. Yet, to get to complete the article, you have to write it. And there is a big barrier in the way. That barrier is you. You are the barrier. But why are you the barrier? Let's get to the second part of this podcast and look at why writing for yourself is a tedious process and why it needs to be avoided.
I suffer really quite badly from nerves on many occasions. I did as a child before examinations. They are gone the moment I step onto the podium or I step onto the pit, because then your nerves are a reflection that you're focused on yourself and how you will be perceived, whereas once your focus is firmly and solely on the music, there's no place for nerves. But I know how I have to best come around it. I have a performance routine, eating at a certain time, resting at a certain time, certain foods that I don't eat on the days of performances, and so on. And I don't think it's a bad thing. I think without a certain heightened adrenaline level, we can't reach that extra something that makes a performance much more special than even the dress rehearsal.
I couldn't agree more. Focusing on the music is the only way out of the nerves of what my teacher, Kenneth Kieser, who's a very smart man, calls the cocktail party in the head, which is this cocktail party that, goes on in your mind. And the main focus of all the people in the cocktail party is to say how terrible you are in every possible sense and to criticize you to death. You're not well prepared. You don't know this. You don't know, da-da-da. When that's going on, which I'm sure everyone's lived that cocktail party in the head one day or another, but when you're in front of a group of people, as we are rehearsing and conducting, this can be turned on and it can be so loud that there's no space for the music to be heard inside you, inside your mind. And so I've worked hard through my development to stop that cocktail party in the head, and you just focus on the music, focus on the phrase and how exciting it is to shape it the way you decided to shape it, or to get to the next sentence that you're going to express, and so on. We have to have this very fine balance between being confident and humble.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the key. And sometimes when humility is overtaking you, then it becomes nervousness and insecurity. Mm. And then when confidence takes over, you can become arrogant.
What you just heard were the voices of Simon Young, who is a conductor from Australia, and Alondra de la Parra, who is a superstar conductor from Mexico. What they're describing is a concept of what I'd call writing for yourself, or rather, writing for myself. When I write an article, my first act is to ask a client for a question. If they ask more than one question, I'm a lot happier, and if they have a list, I'm the happiest. Because now I can stop this silly cocktail party in my brain. This cocktail party pops up every single time, no matter how good you get at the craft of article writing. Most times, I'm just writing an article, but sometimes that article becomes a book. Like the time I wrote the book on dartboard pricing, for instance. I couldn't figure out whether it was good enough. I couldn't understand why anyone would buy the book when I'd written so many articles and done so many podcasts on the topic. Of course, I knew that it's an entirely different experience reading a structured book versus random articles, but even so, you think about the cocktail party a lot.
You don't know this, you don't know, da-da-da.
I had no such trouble when coming up with answers for a future book on the three-prong system. A client and a friend of mine, Paul Wolf, he decided to do a series of 3 interviews with me on the topic of how I take breaks, how I manage to take a 3-month vacation, how we handle vocation and vacation. And Wolf had a series of questions, some prepared in advance and some that organically sprouted from the discussion in progress. It's not like I haven't tried to write the book before. I've created an outline, started on the project, and then abandoned it repeatedly. And it's not because of a lack of skill either. I can easily write the book, possibly in under a week. The problem is that I have to go into my brain to write that book. When Wolf asks me the questions, I'm not trying to think about me. I'm trying to think about the person asking the question. And occasionally I'm thinking of other clients too. The problem is that I would have to get into my own brain to write that book. And so all of those answers that come out, well, they're organic, they're simple, they're stuff that I'm thinking, what would Paul do? What would someone else do?
You're not well prepared, you don't know this, you don't know, da-da-da.
The cocktail party syndrome disappears. It's replaced by a focus on the audience. To write quickly and to write a lot, I need questions. I need a lot of questions. But where do we get these questions? I get most of my questions in 5000bc.com. So clients get in there to the forum and they ask a bunch of questions, and then I write answers to them. I also get a lot of questions through the podcast, through email, through consulting. I don't do a lot of consulting, but every time I do, it's just amazing. So questions come from chats after I make a presentation, and just through listening and reading. What I've learned is I can't look for a random person asking a question online. That doesn't work for me at all. Instead, I have to have a specific person asking me a specific question. And when I'm writing the answer, I'm thinking of that person. This is what gets me to take a walk in that person's shoes and to write with more fluidity than if I sat down with a blank screen staring back at me. We all wonder, hasn't this question been answered before? Aren't there 50,003 variations of this question already on the internet? And the answer is no. No one is going to answer the question like you do. For instance, there are whole books on the topic of focus. But my angle on focus and focus in a distracted world, that's different. So I take 3 months off every year. We still meet our fixed revenue goals. We still manage to write books, conduct courses, do workshops, paint, cook. In short, we can do whatever we want despite the distractions. So the angle is always going to be unique. My voice is always going to be unique. And yours will be too. Your voice, your tone, your language, even the structure of your answer will be different. The question may have been asked a million times before, but the answer, your answer, it's different. And the orchestra in your brain begins to play. You may not be a great writer yet. You may struggle as I did, but even in the middle of that struggle, you'll notice the emotion. You'll realize that everyone has gone home from the cocktail party, but you're not quite alone. Now you've got words on paper. Writing for yourself, it's very difficult. It's disgustingly difficult. It's hard to reach inside your brain and work out how to write an article, how to write a report, how to write a book. But when you write for others, you get that feeling that Young and De La Parra talk about. Suddenly, you're writing for someone else and you feel free. You don't hear that cocktail party in your brain. So a coach, an editor, they help you along. The client and their questions, they bring out the orchestra in your writing. And this takes us to our third part, which is the article itself. The article is also a guide. It's a big guide. So how do you use the article to stay on course? It's a concept called the one idea. And let's find out what this one idea is all about.
The stars are out and ready to shine. Everything's set for the 20th World Cup final. The ultimate contest in the game. One of the ultimate teams against another that's a lot more reliant on one particular talent. It's die Mannschaft against the man.
Almost half of the goals scored in football or soccer are virtually random. And that's according to Martin Lames of the Technical University of Munich. However, there's a book called Das Reboot, and this is by author Raphael Honigstein. And he says that there is also a non-random side to football. He talks about how a well-prepared team can rise from the depths and win a match in the tournament. And especially, he talks about Germany, which is considered to be a world-class team, but was at the bottom of the football heap in 2000. Germany's randomness came from complacency. In the European Championships in 2000, they failed to win a single game. They even lost to the English team, which was considered pretty terrible in the first place. And yet, 14 years later, Germany would rout Brazil 7-1. Then it would make its way to the ultimate prize, defeating Argentina in the World Cup final. What Germany did, and did effectively, was to reduce the randomness. Right after the 2000 Euro disaster, Germany's top professional clubs were ordered to set up academies, and there was a considerable cost to the clubs. So what they did was actively resist this directive. But 10 years later, this move proved to be a boon. It saved the club millions of dollars in transfer fees because more than half the players in the top division were academy graduates. In short, the moment they got rid of their randomness, the German team started to see results. And a similar concept applies to article writing. When we sit down to write, we often get into the state of randomness. And you know it's random because you can't sum up the article with one word or one idea. The moment you have one idea, that idea becomes a wall around the article. You know exactly what you're going to write about, what the subtopics are under that main topic, and how to get the stories, how to get the case studies to support that piece. For instance, this section is about why the article can't be random. Instead of starting the article with a boring line that says, "The worst thing you can do is write a random article," the article starts with a story of disaster. Well, a disaster for German football anyway. Yet, most writers never sit down and write their one word because they're not sure it's the right word. But there is no right word. The word is what you want to communicate. In the introduction, I wanted to communicate a story about a journey, So that's where the story of Isambard Brunel came to light. The second part was about the coach. So we ran into Wolfgang Amadeus's father, Johann Leopold Mozart. The third part was about why writing for yourself is so hard. And then we had Alondra de la Parra and we had Simone Young. They were telling their story.
You're not well prepared, you don't know this, you don't know da-da-da.
And finally, we have the story of randomness, and now we have the German football team. When you have a single word to focus on or a single idea, it's not hard to get stories. But it also forces you to stay within the parameters of that single word. I have to stay within the walls of randomness as part of this article unfolds because I'm talking about randomness right now. So it becomes my binding agent. Ironically, the one word can be picked randomly. The one word in this piece could have been completely different. It could have been about binding. And so the story would be different, the angle would be different. It could have been about boundaries, and yet again, we'd see a different story or a different angle. So you don't have to pick one word that is correct. That one word can be random, but then it forms that binding agent. If you simply sit down to write an article, you're doing what a lot of crummy writers do. Sure, you can pick up the one word or the one idea randomly, but then that becomes your binding agent. It becomes your wall. It becomes your barrier. Now you have focus. The direction of your article is no longer random. You follow the lead of the one word, and your article isn't a mishmash of ideas thrown randomly on paper. You become, like the German Football Association, focused and getting results every single time. You throw randomness out of the football stadium. So that brings us to the end of this podcast. Let's summarize what we've learned. What has been my journey in article writing? So yes, article writing is a journey, and you can limp into the harbor or you can arrive in great shape. To sail into the harbor in glory, I've learned three things over the years. The first thing is you need a coach. And this can be a course, a book, a workshop, but you need that coach. And that coach needs to be a teacher, not a preacher. Then you need an editor. Everyone needs an editor. I have 5 or 6, but even a single editor can make a world of a difference. The second element is one of writing for yourself. It's a headbanging, frustrating process. The best way out of this mess is to get questions. I get questions from clients in 5000 BC, from emails, from consulting, from almost everywhere. But they're not random questions on the internet. They're from a person I know, and this is what makes all the difference. I don't have a cocktail party in my brain because I'm focused on answering the questions of that client. My entire mood, my mode, my method, it changes when I'm focused on them instead of myself. And finally, we have one word. Without the one word, you're in random land. You have to define what you want to say in a word and then look for examples that fit that word. The only thing that's random is the choice of the one word itself. You can choose any word, you can choose any idea, but once you do, everything in the article must align to that one word or idea. And that's what I've learned. These are the 3 things I know about article writing. That it's a journey, and Isambard Brunel would have been proud to be on this crazy, exhilarating journey. So what's the one thing that you can do for yourself? The one thing that you can do is to make sure that you get a coach. Somehow do a course, read a book, find that coach, find the teacher that you trust, and then trust the teacher. And of course, you have to get an editor. And as you know, we don't go outsourcing editors. We insource them from our clients. Maybe you have some friends. Maybe you have someone who's willing to help, and you can get a great editor. I have 5 or 6 or 7 editors that look at things from different angles. So an editor and a coach, and that's going to help you with your article writing. Nothing else is going to be as useful, I can assure you.
Je peux vous aider?
Je suis perdu.
As you know, I've been learning French, and what I do is when I go to pick up my niece every afternoon, that's when I spend 20-25 minutes learning my French, and it's getting better. I'm able to speak a little bit. It's going to take some time, but that's the whole point. That's the journey. And if you would like to join us on a journey in 5000bc.com, well, you know where to go. You have to go to 5000bc.com. What we do in 5000BC is we take concepts like this, like say the one word, and say Mario, who's a member of 5000BC, he read this, the transcript, and he asked whether we could continue this discussion. How do you get to the one word? How do you construct the one word? How do you look at an article or a story and then get the one word from there? And I continue that conversation with them. So that's what 5000BC is about. It's not more information. Well, there's a lot of information there. There are lots of articles, there's lots of content, but mostly it's about you. What are you going to do with it? So when you ask the question, you need someone else to be around to answer that question and to do so in great detail. And what I tend to do is write whole articles. As you know, part of the strategy for me is for you to ask me the questions, because when you ask me the questions, I can answer them, I can create content from them, I can create podcasts from here. But your question, your specific question is being answered. Now, I know that it sounds really weird, and it's okay to be skeptical, because in most forums, the person that starts up the forum, the person that sells you the membership is never around. You would struggle to find many forums where that person is around. And I've been around since 2003 and almost 50,000 posts. If that doesn't impress you, nothing will. However, to get to 5000BC, you have to get on the waiting list. And some people ask, why do you have to be on a waiting list? Well, we don't want people who are in this inordinate hurry. We don't want people that just think that they can just pay something and get in. We want them to sit there and wait for a while and then decide that they really want to be part of 5000BC. If you really want to be part of 5000BC, then that's what you've got to do. You have to wait for at least 3 weeks before we say, okay, fine, we'll let you in. So that's about 5000BC. But there's also the article writing course, and if you haven't already checked that out, you should check that out. The article writing course is expensive. It is one of the most expensive, if not the most expensive, article writing course in the world. But it is certainly the toughest course in the world, because you have to write 5 days a week. Not an article 5 days a week, but you have to write 5 days a week. And, well, you don't get much sleep for 3 months. Neither do I. And that's how we work. We work on skill, not more information. You will find that working with psychotactics is totally different from working with pretty much anybody else. And how can I say this for certain, having never experienced everybody else's work? It's because you will find that I'm around all the time answering questions in the article writing course, in the 5000BC. This is what I enjoy doing. This is what I love doing. And that's why I'm there. It's not just a money-making venture. It's there because I enjoy doing it. When I stop enjoying something, I get out of there. So that's why you know that you get good value from it. And that's why it's expensive. Next week, we're going to be offering little goodies. If you are part of the magic list, that's psychotactics.com/magic. If you are part of that list, you're going to be getting some goodies in the form of audiobooks. I'm not going to tell you any more, go to psychotactics.com/magic and sign up. And then after that, check out 5000 BC. That's it from Psychotactics Land. And I guess I should say au revoir, right? Well, au revoir.